I've been happily married for 5 years, living with my thoughtful husband. We've shared a close bond, though we haven't had children yet, an event we both eagerly anticipate. But life took an unexpected turn following a certain incident, and I find myself compelled to share this remarkable story. My husband is universally regarded as kind, a sentiment echoed not only by me but also by my parents who hold him in high esteem. My sister, a dedicated career woman, has always focused primarily on her work, but she and my husband got along well despite her usually reserved demeanor. Lately, his work responsibilities intensified dramatically. He began returning home late and even started working on his scheduled days off. His new role leading a team meant he was constantly glued to his cell phone, coordinating with his team members at all hours. Though some might have found his sudden change in routine suspicious, I saw it only as a commitment to his job and worried about the toll it was taking on his health. Amid these changes, my sister decided to relocate for a new job opportunity, which required her to furnish her new apartment. Intent on helping her, I planned to drive her to the furniture store on a Saturday. However, an unexpected call from my boss required my presence at work, leaving me in a bind. Fortunately, that Saturday was my husband's rare day off. Despite his recent busyness, he offered to help when he saw my predicament. It was slightly awkward for him to spend the day alone with my sister, but he agreed graciously and even asked to borrow my car since he was in the shop. Grateful for his kindness, I went to handle the emergency at work. It was the first time my husband and sister had spent time together without me. As I dealt with my duties, I couldn't help but wonder how they were managing on their own, hoping they were making the best of their unexpected day together and finding everything my sister needed for her new place. After resolving the issues at work, it was already dark when I finally got a chance to check my phone, planning to meet up with my husband and sister for dinner. However, I was caught off guard by a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end asked if I was a family member of David. Confused, I responded affirmatively, identifying myself as his wife. That's when the caller, a police officer, delivered the shocking news. My husband had been in a car accident, and both he and his passenger, my sister, were unconscious. I barely remember what happened next, but I know I rushed to the hospital as fast as I could. At the emergency department, I gave my name and was quickly escorted to the intensive care unit. Through the glass, I could see my husband surrounded by machines, his body covered in bandages. My heart sank as I stood there, worried about what the future held for him. Later that night, my mother arrived from her home far away to support us through this ordeal. As we waited anxiously, a police officer provided more details about the accident. He explained that David had been driving on a road with good visibility when another car, which had run a red light, struck his. The driver of that car was also seriously injured and was receiving treatment in the same hospital. However, this driver claimed that David's car had been behaving erratically before the crash, leading the police to investigate whether David might have fallen asleep at the wheel. After a tense few days, both my husband and sister regained consciousness, and the doctors conducted several tests. When my mother and I were called in for the results, the doctors shared some difficult news. While they assured us that David and my sister would survive, they warned that both might suffer lasting disabilities. Despite this grim prognosis, my mother and I were relieved that they were alive. We clung to the hope that with rehabilitation, they might recover to some degree. Choosing to focus on the positive, my mother and I didn't share the potential long-term impacts of their injuries with them. Instead, we surrounded them with encouragement and care, hopeful for their recovery and grateful for their survival. My mother took on the role of caring for my sister while I dedicated myself to looking after my husband. In the early days following the accident, he was visibly shaken, struggling both emotionally and physically. He was deeply troubled, not just by his condition, but by the impact the accident had on us all. As time passed, the man who had always been so gentle and kind began to show signs of change. Frustration seemed to take hold of him, particularly with his impaired mobility, the ongoing medical treatments, and the reality of having to leave his job, all of which seemed to weigh heavily on his mind. Despite his growing irritability, I continued to visit him at the hospital regularly, determined to offer my support. During one of these visits, a police detective approached me with new information about the accident. He explained that there had been a leak in the brake oil of my car, which likely contributed to the erratic behavior of the vehicle before the crash. This revelation suggested that an accident was perhaps inevitable, either for me or someone else. Additionally, I learned that the woman who had crashed into us was also suffering. Her mother approached me to apologize, marking our first encounter since the incident. As days turned into weeks, my husband's frustration seemed to escalate. He grew increasingly resentful of my mobility and independence, angered by the contrast between our situations. His frustration often manifested in demanding behavior and outbursts of anger when I was unable to meet his needs as quickly or as fully as he wanted. Objects were thrown and harsh words were exchanged. He would even lash out over minor issues, like my decision to step out to buy lunch. The demands and complaints grew more frequent and intense. I empathized deeply with his pain and frustration, but the reality of our situation required me to balance my time between supporting him and fulfilling my responsibilities. I had to work to support us financially, communicate with the police to stay updated on the investigation, and coordinate with the hospital regarding his care. Despite the challenges and his occasional outbursts, I remained committed to supporting him through his recovery, hoping that with time, patience, and care, we could find a way to navigate this difficult period together. I barely had a moment to myself anymore. My husband's demeanor had become increasingly difficult to manage, and I felt cornered by the escalating tensions. Similarly, my sister was grappling with her frustrations, and our mother was visibly worn out from the strain. I learned that my sister was placing even heavier demands on our mother, who was already stretched thin from not working and caring for us both. Whenever I was unable to visit the hospital, both my husband and sister became more despondent upon hearing from doctors that they might remain paralyzed despite ongoing rehabilitation efforts. To add to the stress, the issue of my car's brake oil leak came up. My sister confronted me accusingly, saying, "Hey, I heard your car was leaking oil. You were supposed to maintain it. Because of your negligence, I can't work or return to normal. Mom's stressed and your husband is just as affected. You're going to have to take care of us for the rest of your life." Her harsh words took me by surprise, and I called our mother, who confessed that my sister had been in this distressed mental state for quite some time. Despite the tension, my concern for my husband drove me to the hospital. When I didn't find him in his room, I eventually discovered him in the common room, quietly sitting with my sister. The visiting hours were nearing their end, and they were alone in the otherwise vacant space. It was there that my husband coldly remarked, "Hey, if you had just taken the car in for inspection, maybe none of this would have happened." His glare was piercing as he added, "Yeah, and now you're the reason your sister and I are in this mess. The insurance will handle some of it, but you'll be looking after us for the rest of your lives. Remember that." His words triggered a rush of emotions in me. Surprised and hurt, I responded, "Since when have you been so close to my sister? What do you mean by that?" He replied, "You don't come around often, and your mom even texted your sister to come by since we're both stuck here and can't walk. What's wrong with talking to your husband?" The entire situation was overwhelming, and it was clear that the stress and fear of our new reality were affecting everyone's emotions and actions in profound ways. Feeling increasingly isolated, I could sense that my husband and sister were aligning against me. With a hint of sarcasm, I tried to lighten the mood. "Right, you two haven't spent much time together before the accident, have you?" Ignoring my tone, my husband replied, "What are you talking about? We're talking about you taking care of us, you know that." My sister avoided my gaze, but nodded in agreement with him as if confirming their expectation of my lifelong support. I didn't expect a straightforward answer from them, but I continued to probe, hoping to make them understand my perspective. Switching topics, I casually mentioned, "I wonder how the person who hit your car is doing now." "How should I know?" my sister retorted defensively. "She hit us when the traffic light was red. It's just unbelievable." "That's right. You can't imagine how scary it was," my husband chimed in. "We need to make sure we get some compensation from her." And I was so close to getting a promotion, too. Their complaints continued, and I felt it was time to clarify some facts. "There's something you both need to know. First off, I had my car inspected just before the accident." "Oh, did you? Then the dealer should be sued. There's no way they didn't know the brake oil was leaking," my sister quickly responded. "That's right," I agreed. "After the accident, the police contacted me. They wanted to examine the car to determine the cause of the accident, so they asked to check my drive recorder. But that old recorder doesn't record sound and doesn't start recording data right after the accident, so you can't get much out of it," my husband said dismissively. "That's where you're mistaken," I corrected him gently. "You didn't know that I had replaced the old drive recorder with a new one, did you?" My sister looked up in surprise. "What?" "I also installed an additional camera inside the car," I continued. Her face grew increasingly pale as I spoke. "You know, the new drive recorders can start recording with even a slight shake of the car. The police have already contacted me about the data they've seen," I revealed. My husband's expression turned to confusion, while my sister looked so pale that she nearly collapsed. Facing them squarely, I confronted her directly. "You were up to something, weren't you? What exactly did you do to the car?" My husband was panicking. "Why do you address my sister like that? You talk to her as if she were your girlfriend," he accused, his voice halting as he grappled with the implications of my statement. I reminded him, "I told you, a slight vibration would activate the recording and it captured many intimate moments between you two." My words left him speechless, and the color drained from his face when I mentioned how the police had asked about the woman in the car with him. His affair with my sister was now painfully obvious. "You've been deceiving me all this time," I confronted them, the revelation hitting hard. My husband, cornered and desperate, began to shift the blame onto my sister. "Linda isn't the only one at fault here," he stammered. Just then, the mother of the woman who had crashed into my car entered the room. I had invited her, seeking some sort of resolution or understanding. "Don't you have anything to say to her?" I challenged my sister, who recoiled at the sight of the distraught woman entering. "Whoa, who's this?" my sister exclaimed, taken aback. "She's the mother of the woman who crashed into you," I explained, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil. My husband fell silent, realizing who she was, as I continued. "And she's also the mother of Marilyn, the woman who was your victim." Hearing the name Marilyn, both my husband and sister turned completely pale, their panic tangible. "What is this? Do you know the woman who was driving the car?" my sister demanded, her voice trembling with shock and confusion. My husband, lost for words, looked utterly defeated. It was then I decided to lay everything out. She was having an affair with David. He had promised her a divorce but never followed through. When Marilyn falsely claimed she was pregnant to pressure him, David told her to get an abortion. After he cut off contact, devastated and seeking revenge, Marilyn targeted me, aiming to hurt me through you, I explained, connecting the dots of the malicious cycle spurred by deceit and betrayal. "So you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time," I concluded, the weight of the situation settling over us. "I can't believe something like this has upended our lives," my sister murmured, the magnitude of the betrayal dawning on her. "No matter how much you cry or scream now, it changes nothing," I said quietly. "This tragedy wasn't brought upon an innocent bystander. It was woven through a web of lies and vengeance that you both were part of." The room fell silent, the harsh truth echoing among us, leaving us to confront the painful consequences of their actions. I poured all my emotions into my words, making sure they understood the gravity of what had happened. You were carrying on an affair behind my back, and Linda, you tampered with the brake oil of my car, intending to hurt me. Yet, ironically, you ended up in the accident yourself. I am the true victim in this mess, I explained, the bitterness clear in my voice. I continued, revealing the depth of my disillusionment. I had considered not seeking a divorce if you had shown some remorse during your hospital stay and honestly explained everything. However, you never once seemed sorry. Instead, you treated me with contempt. Pausing for a moment to let that sink in, I then reminded them, do you remember how we jokingly filled out those divorce papers right after we got married? I never thought I'd actually use them, but today I filed them, so we are no longer married. This is goodbye. With that, I left the dark, quiet hospital, feeling a profound sense of liberation. Expressing all the pent-up resentment had freed me in a way I hadn't anticipated. However, the aftermath of this revelation was not without its consequences. My mother was deeply shocked by the entire ordeal. The betrayal by my sister pained her, and the realization that she would now have to care for her physically disabled daughter alone was overwhelming. While I had severed my ties with David and Linda, I couldn't bear to leave my mother to handle everything on her own. In an attempt to mitigate some of the burden, I approached the woman responsible for the accident. I facilitated the necessary apologies and discussions about compensation, ensuring that my sister, who was inadvertently involved, would be taken care of financially. This was the least I could do to ensure my mother wouldn't be overly burdened. 3 years have passed since that tumultuous time. My ex-husband and I are now divorced and I've moved on, but the scars of those revelations and the weight of those decisions linger, a constant reminder of the complexity of relationships and the unexpected turns life can take. Now I'm living on my own. Back when David and I were married, we were viewed as a close couple, so our divorce came as a shock to my coworkers. Afterward, I noticed an increase in attention from male colleagues, which I attributed to the phenomenon where divorced women might seem more approachable or intriguing to some men. Despite this, the lingering image of my ex-husband made the idea of dating unappealing to me. Instead of pursuing romantic relationships, I channeled my energies into advancing my career. I diligently studied for a certification exam and enrolled in an online business school that I could attend after work. During my marriage, I never envisioned myself pursuing such a path. I had never envied my sister, the career woman, and never thought I'd aspire to be one. Yet there I was, naturally gravitating toward this new goal. Life certainly has its twists. Since then, my ex-husband moved back to his parents' house, but it appears he has become a burden to his family. His relatives blame him for his poor behavior and the way he treated me, and I've heard he's not doing well mentally. He has been acting out violently, causing trouble for those around him. My sister also returned to her parents' home, but her mental state deteriorated further, and she continued to exhibit selfish behaviors. My mother, worn out from the ordeal, used my sister's savings and the accident compensation to place her in a care home. She consulted me before making this decision, and seeing no reason to object, I told her to do whatever she felt was necessary. Navigating through these changes, I've learned to adapt and focus on my personal growth, realizing that sometimes the most challenging situations lead to unexpected paths and new beginnings. At one point, I feared that I would end up caring for both of them for the rest of my life, a prospect that felt like servitude. However, that changed when I passed the certification exam I had been working towards. This achievement led to a transfer to a department where I could effectively utilize my new skills. During this period of professional growth, I grew close to the instructor who ran the online business school I attended. Soon, we began to plan a future together. Unlike my past relationship, this person isn't just kind to everyone. He shows a special kindness towards me. For instance, if I'm working late, he'll make it a point to come home early and prepare dinner for us. This thoughtful gesture means the world to me, and I've come to cherish these moments of simple happiness. Now, as I head home after a long day, I often find myself smiling at the thought of seeing him. I look up at the stars, grateful for the turn my life has taken, and feel eager to return to the warm home we've built together.